Microsoft's initial entry into the home console market had been a relatively successful one. The Xbox sold reasonably well, beating Nintendo to second place in that generation's market. While it didn't come anywhere near close to beating the PS2 in sales, it did introduce several concepts and features to the gaming world that until this point had only been seen on PCs. Easy and affordable online play, an internal hard drive, and downloadable content all became the norm because of Microsoft's work with the Xbox. Work on their sophomore effort, the Xbox 360, would start in 2003. Early on in development, ATI was hired to produce the graphics chip for the new console, known internally at the time as Xenon. IBM worked in conjunction with Microsoft to create the heart of the system, the PowerPC-based Xenon CPU. The system initially planned to launch with 250MB of RAM, but was later doubled to 512MB. This was down to Epic Games pushing for the increase in memory. At some point during development of Gears of War, a flagship title for Microsoft's new console, Epic contacted Microsoft and showed them what Gears would look like running on the 360's 256MB of RAM. Apparently it wasn't particularly impressive, due in part to it not being able to run at 720p on this amount of memory, which would end up being the standard resolution for the generation. Ultimately, it was enough to convince Microsoft to double the console's memory. It was later reported that this upgrade to the hardware cost the company over $1 billion in manufacturing costs, but was seen as worth it as it allowed the 360 to run games at 720p, and even a small handful at the true 1080p resolution. DVDs were once again chosen as the medium of choice for games, only this time the dual layer variant was used, offering up around double the storage space of the single layer counterparts used in the previous generation. This had the upside of continuing to be relatively cheap to produce, however as the generation went on, game sizes started to skyrocket. Games such as id Software's Rage and Square Enix's Final Fantasy XIII, amongst many others, ended up being multi-disc releases on Microsoft's platform, while staying on a single disc on the PS3 due to it utilising the much larger storage capacity of its Blu-ray format. A DVD-based competitor to Blu-ray was released by Toshiba in HD DVD. However, it was a futile endeavour, with HD DVD being discontinued only 2 short years after its release, making the Play for 360 somewhat sought after by collectors due to their limited availability. Following on from the trend set by the original Xbox, a hard drive was included with the Xbox 360, shipping at launch with a 20GB model. As time went on though, and game sizes increased, larger sizes were released, culminating with the 320GB model released with the Gears of War 3 Edition console in 2011. Unlike the original Xbox, the hard drive wasn't strictly speaking internal, and could be easily removed from the console to be transferred to a new machine. The regular 2.5-inch hard drive was stored in a sleekly designed caddy that matched the aesthetic of the console, with only a quick button press being necessary to remove it, with it clipping back into place when required in an entirely toolless process. Later revisions to the 360 changed the hard drive case significantly, making it more internal, however just as easily removed and replaced. Games couldn't initially be installed to the hard drive, however a console update in 2010 which overhauled the dashboard added the feature in. The disc was still required to be in the drive to play the game, as a form of DRM, stopping someone from borrowing a game, installing it, and then returning it while still having access to the game. Installing the game to the hard drive had the benefit of faster loading times and massively reduced the volume of the console, the disk drive being fairly loud, especially in early models. The Xbox 360 released with a somewhat odd choice of having no HDMI port present, presumably to cut costs early on. Instead, an AV port that supported component was used, allowing the system to display up to 1080i. In 2007, a revision was released with an updated motherboard that, amongst other things, added a HDMI port to the system, allowing a 1080p display option for anybody with a capable display at the time. A large selection of original Xbox games were playable on the Xbox 360 from launch. It wasn't true backwards compatibility due to the hardware being very different in the two consoles, instead going with a software-based emulation method. Over 200 games were compatible in North America on launch, and 150 in Europe. More games were added over time, taking the total number of compatible games to 461 when the final update was released in November of 2007. A hard drive was required for the backwards compatibility to function, due to the download of an update from Xbox Live being necessary. Official Xbox magazine also had the updates on their monthly demo discs, for anyone who was unwilling or unable to connect their console to the internet. A month after the final update in December of 2007, digital copies of many of the games became available on the Xbox Live Marketplace, allowing people to buy and play various games without the original disc. With the Xbox 360, Microsoft decided to completely overhaul the UI design to improve the user experience. The The dashboard on the original Xbox, and most other consoles up to this point for that matter, were relatively simple. It had options to access display settings, configure the internal time and date, and manage the system's storage as well as Xbox Live. All pretty standard stuff. The 360 took all this one step further, multiple steps further in fact, launching with what was known as the Blades dashboard, a colourful, animated desktop with a style that mimicked the subtle curves of the console itself, separated into sections for Xbox Live, games, media and system settings. From here you could browse the Xbox Live marketplace, communicate with friends, manage save games and console settings, and launch games, etc. Pretty much everything you would expect to be able to do from a console's home menu. The presentation was a huge step up from anything seen before. I honestly have such fond memories of the Blades dashboard, and I'm saddened that it's gone forever now, unless you can find a console that hasn't been updated since 2007. My footage for this video is a hacked together version of it running on an emulator that only just barely works, but it's about the only way to get footage of it these days. This dashboard was patched in 2008 with a completely overhauled version called the NXE Dash, or New Xbox Experience. It brought a host of new features such as Xbox avatars, a virtual play character that could be designed and used in certain games, very similar to the Mii's used on the Wii. Media playback functionality was extended, with subscription services like Netflix becoming the norm, and possibly most importantly, it added the ability to form an Xbox Live party, allowing multiple people to group up and chat privately, something that's taken for granted today. In 2010, this dashboard was further updated to add Kinect functionality and installing of games to the hard drive. I still have a console with this dashboard that I refuse to update. I don't look at it as fondly as the Blades Dash, but it was pretty good nonetheless. 2011 saw the last major revision to the Xbox 360's user interface, called the Metro Dashboard. If you play a 360 that's been updated at any point in the last decade, a version of this is what it's been running. It functions as a sort of hybrid between the Blades and NXE dashboards. It added even more media functions and stripped away a lot of features, while simultaneously making the whole thing look more cluttered. It was vaguely reminiscent of the design philosophy that Microsoft had been taking with Windows and their ill-fated smartphone line. That's not to say it didn't implement some useful features, because it did. Cloud saves finally making their way to the platform being the most notable. The Xbox 360 released on November 22, 2005 in North America, 2 weeks later in the EU and a further week later in Japan. Two models were available on launch. The Core, which was later renamed to the Arcade, retailing at $300, it was a completely white console and didn't come with a hard drive, meaning that either a memory card or a hard drive had to be purchased separately in order to download content from the marketplace. Online play was also often dependent on a hard drive being present. Composite cable was included, limiting the console to standard definition resolutions without the purchase of a component cable, and the controller was wired. The second of the two models available was known as the Pro and retailed at $400. Visually similar to the Core model, however it featured a silver accent on the disc tray. A 20GB hard drive was included in the package, allowing for games to be downloaded and later installed, as well as no restrictions when playing online. A composite component cable hybrid was included, meaning that HD resolutions could be displayed and a wireless controller was present. Both versions of the console were identical on a technical level, neither having any kind of performance advantage over the other, with everything missing from the core package being available separately. The launch was both successful and somewhat rocky. It sold out completely on a release in all regions other than Japan. This sounds like a great achievement, however it was down to Microsoft not manufacturing enough units before launch to meet the demand, rather than demand being overwhelming. 10% of the total number of consoles available found their way onto eBay during the first week of sale, somewhere in the region of 40,000 consoles. Despite this, Microsoft managed to ship 1.5 million units in the first 2 months between the launch and the end of the year. The Xbox 360 launched with 14 games. Call of Duty 2 stood out, first sequel in the now long-running military shooter series, along with Project Gotham Racing 3, crime thriller come first-person shooter Condemned, and the snowboarding game Amped 3. Alongside this, the usual cavalcade of sports games and some ports of games from the previous generation. Launching to a good critical reception, the Xbox 360 went on to sell 84 million units. Early criticism was aimed at the incredibly high failure rate of the console, and while it was eventually overcome, the console's reputation took a hit early on. In its first year of sale, it launched in 36 countries worldwide, which is more than any other console at the time. The Xbox 360 enjoyed a relatively long life, which was discontinued in April 2016, 11 years after it launched, and was considered current gen for 8 years, around 2 years more than a typical console generation. Several revisions beyond the Core and Pro were released during that time, with the Elite model featuring a black case and a 120GB hard drive, This was followed by a slim model, a small redesigned chassis that offered up either a 4GB or a 250GB hard drive. And finally, the Xbox 360e model, which had an even sleeker design that mimicked the Xbox One that launched at the same time. As previously mentioned, the 360 had some issues early on in its life. The most well-known of these being the infamous Red Ring of Death, with 3 of the 4 quadrants on the front of the console lighting up red to indicate a hardware failure. Various theories were thrown around early on as to why it happened, most related to the manufacturing process or materials used, but it did not exclude satanic possession. No, seriously. In 2008, a woman filed a class action lawsuit against Microsoft, which claimed to have had a heart attack upon seeing the 3 red lights, believing it to be Satan himself possessing the Xbox. The lawsuit was later settled out of court, unsurprisingly. Typically though, this was the result of the console getting too hot during use, gradually warping the motherboard and breaking the solder and tracers used to connect the various internal components. It was reported that 30 to 35% of early consoles suffered with this problem at some point. Microsoft made steps to address the problem early on, with several motherboard and internal revisions over the duration of the console's life. A 3-year warranty scheme was put in place for the issue, allowing anyone suffering with it to send their console to Microsoft and receive a repaired or replaced unit back in the mail, all completely free of charge. Other errors plagued the system early on, the E74 error being another common one, with the system booting to a black screen with an error code asking the user to contact Microsoft customer service. This is the console killer that I had at least twice on 2 different 360s. I've so far managed to escape the Red Ring of Death though. Microsoft managed to get the hardware issues under control eventually, with the failure rate being far lower once the slim console was released, with those mostly all being fine these days. That being said, I've got 4 Xbox 360s at the moment, all of which are from the early days of the system's life, and all have survived okay so far. Microsoft's online service that it established with the original Xbox, called Xbox Live, was massively expanded upon with the 360. It was still a paid service, requiring a subscription for online play, however now a free tier was added allowing users to send messages and access the storefront to download demos, trailers and other content without the need for a monthly fee. In 2008, the service was updated along with the console to implement party chats, allowing 8 people to use the voice chat together at once, regardless of what they were playing. This was honestly one of the biggest changes to the online landscape that the console saw. The amount of trash talk in lobbies dropped to practically nothing overnight. The original Xbox had downloadable content for select games, but was largely dealt with on a per-game basis through the game itself. The addition of the Xbox Live Marketplace defined how digital content was distributed on consoles from that point onwards. Users could browse what was available without being in a game, check out demos for upcoming releases and download trailers for them. Themes for the console were available, changing how it looked, and play profiles could be customised with different gamer picks. Square Enix released their 11th mainline entry into the Final Fantasy series several years before the 360 released, notable for being an entirely online game that allowed players to play together on the same servers, regardless of their location in the world. Additionally, this wasn't restricted by platform either, with PS2 and PC players all playing together. In early 2006, Square Enix brought Final Fantasy XI to the Xbox 360, continuing their philosophy of allowing everyone to play together. PC, PS2 and Xbox 360 players could all connect and communicate with each other on the same servers. Unfortunately, access to the servers was removed in 2016 for the Xbox, but the game still lives on today on PC. One of the most popular new features of the Xbox 360 was the achievement system. Games featured specific tasks within them that awarded points, typically based on difficulty. These points were called gamerscore. The objectives could vary massively from game to game, even for those within the same genre, ranging from completion challenges, beat each level in the game, to get X number of kills with a specific weapon, and win a number of games in multiplayer, with almost every conceivable variation and possibility in between. Initially, full games featured 50 achievements for 1000 gamerscore, with 125 more being possible with the addition of DLC. Downloadable Xbox Live Arcade games would have 12 achievements and 200 gamerscore to unlock. As time went on, restrictions for the number of achievements and games were gradually released, with some games now having upwards of 3000 gamerscore available. The score was displayed on player profiles and very quickly evolved for some into a race to get the highest score possible. Most notably, a gamer by the name of Stallion83 made it his personal mission to achieve 1 million gamerscore, something he eventually succeeded at in 2014 and continues to improve upon today. Achievement hunting seems to have died down in popularity a little today compared to the late 2000s when it first took off, but it's still enjoyed by many. I've not been looking forward to this section. I'm probably not the right person to talk about the Kinect enthusiastically. I never owned one when the 360 was current gen, and I still don't. Motion controls, when they're working correctly, which is infrequently in my experience, aren't my favourite thing in the world and can only just about tolerate them in VR. Yeah, the Wii video is going to be fun. The Kinect launched in November of 2010 and was a full-body, motion-sensing camera used for certain games as well as navigation around the console dashboard. It used infrared projectors and detectors to track movement and could be used for gesture recognition. It also had a microphone built in to add speech recognition to the console. Games for the add-on were a mixed bag, as is usually the case with games focusing on motion controls. Kinect Adventures ended up being the best-selling game on the system, though this is likely down to the fact that it came bundled with the Kinect. It received a generally positive reception upon its release, with reviewers such as IGN stating that for a casual player, it was incredibly appealing. Criticism was aimed at the price point. At $150 on launch, it wasn't cheap, and as such, a tough sell for a lot of people. This, however, didn't stop it from selling roughly 24 million units across its life. I don't really know what else to say about the Kinect. It was Microsoft's response to the utter domination of the Nintendo Wii this generation. Technologically far more advanced than what Nintendo's platform offered, but somehow missing what made the Wii special or popular. It carried forward over to the Xbox One in 2013, where it garnered far less praise and success, and was quietly dropped completely by Microsoft in 2017. The 7th console generation was exceptionally long-lived, spanning 8 years between console releases. The Xbox 360 was the first to market during this time and gained an early lead over Sony and Nintendo. Microsoft expanded on the groundwork they had set with the original Xbox, most notably making vast improvements to their online service. Visuals improved dramatically, performance often took a hit to achieve this, it being quite possibly the worst generation ever in that respect. I said in my PS3 video that I spent roughly 50% of the generation with the PS3 and 50% with the 360. While that is true, I also said that I didn't remember having a particular fondness for either platform over the other. Making this video has made me come to realise that that wasn't strictly speaking accurate. Going back to these old games to record footage hit me with a wave of nostalgia that I just didn't get from making the PS3 video. There was something about the 360 that just hit right compared to the other consoles available. It's quite possible that it's a case of the rose-tinted glasses. I have more memories of playing games like Rainbow Six Vegas and Gears of War Online than pretty much anything else around that time, or in general, come to think of it. The 360 ended up coming last in terms of sale that generation, the Wii obliterating everything, but it was a close fight between Microsoft and Sony, with only 3 million sales between them. Thanks for watching. If you managed to get this far into the video, please consider leaving a like and subscribing for more content like this. Did you have a favourite 360 game, or were you firmly in the PS3 or Wii camp? Let me know down in the comments.